Hello, this is a History Detectives event with GR Stories, reminiscing about the putting together, sharing, telling, and celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Vietnamese community here in Grand Rapids. I'm going to share our screen so we can get a little bit of a backdrop here and introduce you all to Matt Vriesman and Tran, both fantastic teachers and award-winning teachers at East Kentwood High School. I'm going to have them introduce themselves as I ask them the first question. So, just getting to it, Matt. Matt, I met because he was both the state history teacher of the year and then the national history teacher of the year. And he gained those accolades by his collaboration with the Grand Rapids Public Museum. So, Matt, can you tell the story about how you connect the teaching of history in Grand Rapids to the local history here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you so much, Tony, for inviting me and really, I know Leah is as well. We're both honored to talk about this project. We just know that for students, um, relevancy is everything. We have to not only just teach them facts they have to learn, but explain, help them see why this matters. And we're always trying to get my students to realize how important their own story and their own voice is, right? Especially like it's more than, history class isn't just about learning about what happened, but it's very much about what type of society we want to build together, right? Um, in our republic. So I always want students to feel that they are part of the story and their stories are tied to, this national history. Like, how did we get to this place? How did you specifically get here? And so in order to really make that obvious to students, rather than just me philosophizing like this, which doesn't work, if we can make history local and have them understand how national themes impacted people here in Grand Rapids, that just does a lot of the heavy lifting for me and really boosts student engagement. So that's always my goal.
Lay, so you're not a history teacher, but you've lived history, as we all have. So, um, how did you come to? So you're an art teacher. You also lead the Asian American Student Association at the school there. Talk about how you, first of all, came to think about participating in telling this story with your students, and then some of your early thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Tony, for inviting me to this very meaningful event at the Grand Rapids Public Music Library, I should say. um, uh, for me, the first thing that came to mind when I thought about this project is how I connect my own personal experiences with the students and their families and the community, and giving us a choice, an opportunity, I should say, to tell our stories, and having the students be able to learn about their own history, their own family history, and having their voice be heard. Um, and and in the end, I think what my end goal is to connect the community as one, and bringing our voices and our stories to the forefront and sharing it with, obviously, to the community. And so, to me, that's super important. And being able to collaborate with you and Matt on this has been just an awesome experience and very meaningful.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you feel like the larger public seems to have a sense of um, the contributions to the history of the Vietnamese community here, or is it more of a just a larger, um, diverse group of people that live in the city?
Um,
Hmm.
I think individually we all have a story, and our individual stories can be woven together. And there's some commonality between the Vietnamese community and with other communities as well. Um, Definitely, my students have a story to tell, but at first they were very hesitant about it. And so Matt and I did a lot of background work on this and convincing them that their stories are important. You
Yeah.
know, one string of thread, okay, cannot be strong, but when it's woven together with lots of other stories and other threads, it is much stronger. It makes our community stronger.
So I pulled up here. I hope you guys can see this image of us all in front of the newcomers at the museum. Is it there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Would both of you tell the story of like traveling there that day and visiting the museum and kind of what your thoughts were and also the way your students viewed the museum?
Yeah. So really, I'll go back to the first question you asked me that I kind of answered more broadly, but specifically for this project. Um, the AP US history curriculum the College Board sets out says that all of our students need to, not only know about the push-pull factors for all the different waves of immigration in US history, but specifically states in their curriculum that students need to be able to explain how each wave of migrants to the United States impacts society of the United States. And they do a very good job explaining that, but the German Irish migration in 1840s and 50s, and this story, is very relevant to today, right? We have the current president has a few executive orders that are currently in effect about refugees, and in those executive orders, makes claims about what U.S. policy should be regarding refugees based on history and what refugees do or do not contribute to our society. Teaching at East Kentwood, the most diverse school in the state, we have a large refugee population at our school. I just thought this was not a place in the curriculum that we could swing and miss, right? I have every single one of my classes, from AP US history, AP world history to AP African American studies, has got Vietnamese students in it. So how are we going to teach US history, follow the College Board's guidelines of teaching, how do immigrants impact US society? How are we going to swing and miss? We can't. And I have 6 different AP US history textbooks that I like to kind of I like to compare them and the narratives that they tell, right? And none of them, 0 out of 6, has anything to say about how the Vietnamese refugees impacted US society. Um, and so the College Board says we need to know that. And then the College Board also approved 6 textbooks that don't mention that at all. And so I was like, okay, our students, not only like do they need to learn history, but this is an opportunity for our students to share history that is literally missing from our textbooks. And it's also really interesting, the question that you just asked, Lay, because when I talk to students, even when I talk to our Vietnamese students, and I start talking about refugees, we have a large refugee population at East County High School. But I think students think that refugees speak Swahili or Arabic, right? The students are like, well, Vietnamese aren't refugees, right? They're the students who are kicking butt in every single class, and they don't see them. That word refugee means person who needs a lot of help and isn't dominating. And so when we approach our students like, hey, we're going to do this lesson about refugees, and there's a huge gap in the textbook, in your family stories, your history, the artifacts of your life fill in the gap on this refugee lesson. The kids are like, not mine. Like, that's not my family story. They didn't even see that connection. And so Lay was saying, we kind of had a hard time convincing students like, no, like, not only do I need to teach, like, this is not Mr. Vriesman needing to teach you this stuff. We need you to come down to the museum, and we need you to talk to grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and we need you to record that because you need to teach us. I want to share this with other AP US history teachers because we're not doing a good job here. There's an incomplete story, and your family photos can help tell this story. So it took a lot of convincing, but I think getting the kids finally to sign up, and we had to brave a few snow days. I think the weather kept getting in the way, but finally getting students downtown, having yourself, Tony, it was really cool to have. We have the CEO of the museum come. Dale is coming to talk to them, and it was really cool for them to see other adults. Not just their teachers, but other adults invested in their story and explained it to them why their story matters. I think that was helpful to get them there physically. But it was really exciting, but it was hard to convince students how important their stories were at first. And then, we'll talk about that later, but then we got rolling and it was the coolest thing I've ever been part of. So
Lay, what were
Mhm.
some of your feelings about being there? There's a small little exhibit that kind of briefly tells a story, but being there with your students, looking at the exhibit that tells a story, but then everybody else's story.
Right. So prior to getting to the museum, I talked to a group of students about my own experiences, how the churches sponsored us and the schools and all of that. But they were just words. And then being in front of that exhibit and seeing these artifacts, um, I, I I was able to connect what I've shared with them and say, here are the artifacts. Look at this and this and this, the stories and the display, the sign from the Freedom Flight Refugee Center. And I was able to tell that particular story to them and how that organization has helped hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees coming to West Michigan. I think it just um, drove the story home, and I felt much closer to my students with that experience. And that was so such an awesome day. I think being able to see artifacts in front of them, the visuals. Um, I think it has inspired both the students and myself to get going with this story. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I'll just say, as an observer that day, it was really. I felt really honored, or whatever the right word, just thankful that I could be in the background watching it as the. And so, and when you talk about artifacts, you're talking about suitcases and religious items and
Hmm.
cooking utensils and visions and signs, and they realize that they have those in their home. And obviously the Freedom Flight, not only did it help thousands, it probably helped their parents or grandparents,
Exactly. Hmm.
and navigate here.
yeah, it's just that it really helped click for the students. And I remember you told them that day, and I ended up putting that like in their rubric. Um, but having them think about like what is an artifact, right? And
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
were like, something fancy like at a museum. And you were like, well, you told them something like, actually, it's positionality, like it being at the museum makes it artifact, right? But like it's really everyday things that help tell the story about how people made a home here, in Grand Rapids. And students were like, I don't have artifacts. And they pictured like, they think history class like the Vietnam War. Like, I don't know, I don't have any, communist guns, you know what I mean, at home. So, my grandpa wasn't a general, or so we didn't really have a dramatic story. It's like, no, that's not what this story is about. We're talking about how did the Vietnamese community make home here, and how did that community make West Michigan. Now I'm jumping to the conclusion, but how did it make West Michigan a better place for everybody? How did it make East Kentwood High School a better place? And so watching the students slowly be like, I don't have any artifacts, to like, let's see a picture like, oh, like what about my dad's like business card that's like in English and
Hmm.
Vietnamese? And it's like, oh wait, I've got, and
Exactly.
so
Hmm.
it was a slow progress. Then it started going like, oh, I've got, everything's an artifact in my house, right? And
Hmm.
it's exciting to see them get it. It's really powerful.
So let's go back to 1975. Lay, I think that I'll speak for Matt too. I just remember being in your classroom, and you told Matt and I the story of what happened to your family in April 1975, and I think both of our jaws were dropping. And we of course decided that you needed to be the keynote speaker at our event. But
No
um,
doubt.
give the audience a little bit of this history. That is important to tell as well.
Okay, in a nutshell, my part of my family, my dad and six siblings um, of mine, we left Vietnam on the day that the communists took down the gate to the presidential palace. As soon as we heard that on the radio, the boat engine started and we went out to sea. we saw an American ship and we were rescued. We were the first family up on that ship. And we stayed on that ship for a whole week. We passed the Philippines, and then they decided, oh, we're not going to drop you guys off there. We'll drop you off in Guam, and a little island. Back then in 1975, it was just sand and beaches. I did not remember seeing one standing building. I heard it's very different now. So we were there enjoying the beach, but not really enjoying it. um, then we waited for an orderly departure, so to say. Um, then my family was flown to the Freedom. No, no, let me take that back. We were flown to Pennsylvania, Indiana Town Gap refugee camp, where we stayed from the end of June to September. Then we waited again for a sponsor from Grand Rapids, um, Christian Reformed Church here. They sponsored us, and we arrived to Grand Rapids on September 15th, 1975. And we've settled here in West Michigan with a lot of help from our church members. And then the small Vietnamese community has already started here. And so we clung onto each other, helping each other navigate jobs, driving, going to the doctors and things like that. It was a very close knit family, community. Um, and so that's basically my story. My students, of course, have a different story. Some of them have grandparents that shared similar stories as mine. But now most of my students, I should say, have been sponsored, either sponsored here by family members or some of them have been born here. And so we have that connection. And anyway, 50 years, went by just like that. And here I am. I can't believe I've been here 50 years. So just like other immigrants here to West Michigan, we didn't think that we would live here forever, but here we are.
I'm going to ask you some more questions about the different groups that came later, because I know that to some extent there and we had your students really tell us stories of the different eras of people visiting. Can you tell us a little bit about these pictures here? So these are refugee camps. So in the
Hmm.
early years after 1975, there were initially the Vietnamese came to one of these refugee camps. Can you tell a little bit about it? And then also if you can identify some famous people in these photos.
Yeah, so I believe Betty Ford, on the upper left picture, she is at Fort Chaffee. Um, and then President Ford, I'm not sure which refugee camp he is
I
at.
think that's
The
Pendleton.
upper right looks very much like the refugee camp that I stayed in, Indiana Town Gap. Uh, I remember the white buildings, the army barracks and things like that. And our family stayed on the first floor, then the second floor. So there four major refugee camps around the United States: Pennsylvania, Camp Pendleton, Fort Chaffee, and then there's one more smaller one down in Florida.
Correct.
That's where all of the Vietnamese refugees that have fled in 1975. We were housed in these four different refugee camps, and we waited for either a family or a church or an organization to sponsor us. Then we, you know, dispersed all over the United States and creating communities. And West Michigan became a really vibrant hub for the Vietnamese community. And I think a lot of it has to do with President Ford's, action and inspiration. And so a lot of churches in this area, um, stepped up and stepped in and took on Vietnamese families. And we're forever grateful for that.
Well, we'll talk more about your thoughts. Um, Actually, meeting Steve Ford, President Ford's son, in the celebration at the end of our talk here. Um, a couple other just historical pieces that we should cover before we get back to the students. Can you tell us about Freedom Flight?
Freedom Flight Refugee Center was housed in the Alger Heights area. And I remember Reverend Howard Skipper and his wife established this organization. And so many of my friends worked in this organization. And I myself, as a young mom at the time, would stop by the Freedom Flight Refugee Center quite a bit because I remember filling out paperwork for my extended family and relatives to be sponsored. Some of them were in Kuala Lumpur or in Thailand, in the Philippines, and they needed to be resettled in West Michigan. And so you open a case and have the workers there help you. One of them is Duyên Bui, and Mrs. Hung, Mrs. Skipper herself would help us. And yeah, it was Freedom Flight Refugee Center was the anchor for us at that time. That's one of them. And the other organization is the Catholic organization as well. Okay.
Very important, and I heard lots of stories about both of those organizations. I was pleasantly surprised as I was going through some of the archival material, Grand Rapids Press, and other materials about how strong Grand Rapids was in terms of supporting and encouraging others to welcome the Vietnamese to the community. And so I want to talk a little bit about the institutions that accepted, as Lay was getting to earlier. But what is your kind of, and I'd like both of you to respond, of seeing this quote here from the Grand Rapids Press that welcomed refugees and encouraged those to welcome. How do you respond to seeing this from this historical timepiece in 1975?
For me personally, it overwhelms me when I think of total strangers who don't even know my name would accept my family, open their hearts and their pocketbook, right, and set up a home for us when we were picked up at the airport and then driven to the Alger Heights area, and they told us, "This is your home." And I remember running through the house. There's rice in the pantry, fish sauce in the cabinet, clothes in the closet that fitted me, and shoes. You're you just drop everything and start your life. It's amazing. I get very emotional talking about this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Lay. I think my first thought to that is just, yeah, what a dang good investment that was, because you said open the pocketbooks, but we know from the statistics that the economic scale is tipped in the favor of U.S. society, right? Because that investment, small amount in the beginning, but the revenue from people who come here and are just willing to do whatever it takes to support their family, and the larger percentage of people who are starting their own businesses. And in the case of Lay Tran, the people of West Michigan got a nationally recognized art teacher out of the deal, yeah. Which is so when you say open the pocketbook, is it's, I think the big thing that jumped off the page for me going through my student stories and looking at this history is like, this is what a positive thing for West Michigan that this happened, right? It wasn't like West Michigan, it cost West Michigan, but it was the right thing to do. Like it was an investment. And I think, your story and all of our student stories like kept making that point over and over. So my take would be, I guess hearing Lay makes me emotional, but my take is a little bit less emotional and personal, obviously. But as a history teacher, we're looking at change over time. And so President Ford's presidency is very significant because, I make the argument because in easy doing a U.S. history survey class, you can kind of get brushed over, but it's a big deal when the College Board switches units, right? So the College Board has designated the year 1980 as a major shift in themes for U.S. politics and society. And the picture of, the pictures of President Ford at refugee camps, this quote really stand out when we are talking about change over time, especially like from the Republican Party. So how we actually are going to use all this in class is we start with the inquiry approach, right? You can't just tell students a bunch of facts and then have them write it down and memorize it or care. But we start with, the current executive orders about refugees that claim the United States can't take refugees because refugees are dangerous and expensive. So first students are like analyzing that, and it's pretty obvious that that's the point. So we say, okay, like, is that true? Let's go back to the, the start of this policy. And then it just, instead of like reading from a textbook, we're looking, I'm like, hey, isn't that girl like the president of ASU this year? Right? It's like, yeah, okay, what's her story? And our students are just so amazing. One after one, one after the other get up there and are explaining their stories now and how they are going to Michigan or, some impressive school on a scholarship. And, they're going to go in the medical field to honor their grandparents' sacrifices. And like, wow, this is a really good deal for the United States to get all these amazing humans here who are going to make our society better. So that's what I get out of it. And we just look at change over time and using evidence and inquiry to kind of compare political statements versus the realities of people's stories. And those are the history classes that get kids to forget they're in school, forget that they're supposed to think this is boring, and to think, hey, this really matters. The way that we frame our history really matters. And that's the goal for a social studies teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish we had you. All of us had you as our teacher. One more comment about the kind of the 1970s and this initial opening. And now again, I go back to the Grand Rapids Press quote there. All this requires is human kindness. But the other thing I got from the messaging from both Gerald Ford and the Grand Rapids Press at the time was that it was like Matt said, this isn't charity. This isn't us doing something nice for people this is us bringing people to our country. And then what would our city, what would our community be like without this group of people? And there would be large holes to fill. And again, the uh, the young man that was a East Kentwood graduate who went on to the Marines and West Point. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. His story was that the number of men that he oversaw in the military were immigrants, and so these are people who are very much coming. Anyway, I also was really, as someone who was on the Grand Rapids School Board, I was really impressed by the work of Grand Rapids Public Schools, but also learning about the churches, just a little bit more about the way the schools and the churches kind of welcomed the children of the community when you first got here in the 70s?
So when I arrived here, I within days, my dad had us registered at Alcher Elementary School, and that particular school had a really strong ESL program, and Mrs. Skipper was in the program, Mr. Tuấn Pham, and many others, other Vietnamese teachers. And that program, I believed, had created a foundation for me, because I remember being pulled out an hour a day going to the ESL center and having help with my homework. And that little bit of help really got me to plow through a lot of the work that I could not understand. And so I was in the ESL program for 2 years, and that was so helpful. Not only that, but then my peers who are Vietnamese too, has really made me feel welcome and feel like home again. And I remember the principal at that time. Oh, at this time I forgot his name. And I remember hearing him. We were in the playground and we were playing all kinds of Vietnamese games. We taught our peers to play jump rope, hopscotch, and all kinds of games that we used to play in Vietnam. Now, I know that I didn't know much English, but I remember what I heard when he walked by me. He says, "Man, these Vietnamese kids have really revolutionized this school. I've never seen Alger Heights like this. All the kids are playing together. This is just beautiful, you know." And I remember that. I remember hearing that sound. And then later, much later, I go, "Oh, I understood what he said." And I still remember it to this day. And it just gives me goosebumps when I think about that, that he saw a change in his school, and how the Vietnamese kids have just, came into this school and just changed the landscape completely. We bought games, we bought our language, our culture to this school, and we're sharing it with our peers. And I know that Palmer Park was another school, Congress School, and many, many churches. And we kept the ESL program running really strong for the first few years. And then soon we didn't need the ESL program for the Vietnamese kids anymore. So, yeah, but we
Those are
needed that.
great story. I want to, so eventually, the community ends up in East Kentwood, and I got two pictures here that are fantastic. This is this one I think Matt referred to earlier about the business card,
This is
and then this one here, which is obviously who knew history could be so much fun, right? How did East Kentwood become the center of the community? And I think both of you have perspectives on this.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, well, I probably you could answer that question better than I could lay that specific question, but I will say what is really special about East Kentwood High School is that we know from national trends, East Asian, Southeast Asian immigrant groups who come to schools, like when originally come, like East Kentwood is a Title I funded school, right? We're in a high poverty concentrated district. We just have so much diversity, economic diversity, linguistic diversity at our school. But what's really cool about East Kentwood is some of our families who come to the United States, and then, the next generation finds more success, and the next generation finds even more success. Nationwide, that means they're moving to different districts and they're getting out of the district that, receives Title I funding. But I've heard just, being here the last 8 years, so many stories have said, well, one of my cousin, they tried to get out of East Kentwood. They moved to, sorry, I'm going to name drop schools, but East Kentwood's the best. So, they tried to move to Jenison, and man, he just had such a bad first semester. They moved him right back to East Kentwood, or, I guess I don't have to call it all the districts that I've heard, but East Kentwood has made a play. Maybe I kind of want to call it a few more. No, East Kentwood has made it our goal to try to make every student feel seen and celebrated. And there are safe places, and there are heroes like Lay, who runs ASU, and what that club does for the students. Lay, I mean, yeah, deserves so much credit for that really cool space for our students. And this day, working with these students, I have to one very short story. I'll keep it short, but one of the coolest moments I've ever had as a teacher is a student was showing me her draft this day about an interview with her dad, about her dad, coming to the United States. And there was a part in it, and I was like, wait a second. So your dad like ran to Cambodia and then got arrested. Like, then what happened? Like then you jump to the next paragraph and he's coming to the United States. Like, what? And she's like, oh, I don't know. And she's like, I was like, well, can you call him? And she's like, okay. So she just goes out in the hallway and comes back 20 minutes later. And I've never had a pure moment of education in my life. I'm like, she's like bubbling. She's like, oh, she just heard the story from her dad that she didn't know. And I was like, what happened? She's like, I can't tell you. I just got to write it down. I got to write it down. She didn't, it was like, it had nothing to do anymore with the teacher or you have to do this. It was like, she was literally pushing me out of the way because her dad had just told her a story that made someone like,
Mhm.
this is the coolest thing I've ever been a part of.
Mhm.
But it
That's
was,
true. Every single student that wrote their story or interviewed their family came back to us and says, "We never knew that about our family. We didn't know that I didn't know that my mom and dad or my grandpa had to go through all of that hardship, you know, being on the boat, escaping in the middle of the night to get here. And then I didn't know that my grandpa sponsored us." So it gave Matt and myself just goosebumps hearing their stories because they were digging up their own family history right in front of us. Yeah.
And it's and those stories are hard to tell and hard to hear stories.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm gonna switch now since you're mentioning the stories. This is just another moment. Um, the two on the ends here are the visiting the museum. Um, why was this picture in the middle so significant? The two young women with this newspaper story. Do you remember?
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that?
Caitlin, that's Caitlin holding the newspaper. And she says that was a story of her family. And it was covered by the Grand Rapids Press at that time. And her dad had saved the story. So she was able to retrieve it and
Yeah. She
shared it with
didn't
us.
like look up like the scan. Like her family had saved this folded Grand Rapids Press, and that was her, she was very, very proud of that. And
Yeah.
it was just so awesome. Students like here's like my mom and my aunt as little girls at this temple. I don't know where it is. And then the kids are crowding around and they're like, oh, that one's in Rockford, or they're just able to help each other tell the stories because my mom doesn't remember where this is, but someone else knows where that is. It was just so cool.
Hmm.
So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here. Uh, we have, um, and on the GR Stories website, that all of these stories are on there. And I know we don't have time to tell all these stories, but I just want to. I'm just going to go through the list of 20 some students. And I think it's really important that we just recognize as we look at these images that these are the stories. So we talk about the phrase living history, but I just kind of want to imagine that each of these images that you'll see as we go through this was a student who discovered their own history, their own biography as a result of this process, and then contributed to the knowledge of the rest of the group. So feel free as I go through this, Matt and Lay, to just add some commentary, but I just want to
Yeah.
honor each of them.
I just think it's cool when without the commentary, just their faces.
So it's Tyler, help me out with their
Yes.
names.
Oh, Tyler Wood, this is when his family arrived to Grand Rapids, and they were greeted by their sponsors. Cool.
Ethan, and this
Yeah.
was what the sponsoring
The
church,
church
correct?
that sponsored his family. Yep. Kyle, his father worked for the Scott Group that made the carpet for the White House Oval Office.
He
Right.
was a graduate. So I one of my strategies when students couldn't really envision this, I reached out to some ringers who were in college. Like, hey, can you come in? We're doing this day. Can you like show us examples? And so Kai was one of those students who's he brought the students like snacks, and it was pretty
Yes.
cool to have some college students in there.
To Yen,
This is the gal that called her father
Yeah,
in the middle of our work session to get the story.
Tony,
here's another ringer.
Yeah, you know Tony more than I do, Matt.
Yeah. Well, really, Tony did an AP World project as a sophomore where he interviewed his grandpa about he was telling stories about French colonization in
Mhm.
Vietnam. So anyway, so I was like, hey Tony, remember we did an awesome thing? Well, we're doing something even cooler now. Like will you come in? And Tony was very helpful. the students. And then he got to share his family story too.
Vivi Letou. If you look at her last name, you would say, oh, that's not a Vietnamese last name. So her father had taken middle name and last name and combine it.
Oh,
He
wow.
wanted to get his family to be assimilated to the American culture ASAP.
Sophia.
Sophia, this is her parents' wedding, very 80s right here. And we held our weddings at Chinese restaurants. That was part of our culture.
Caitlin.
Caitlin,
Yeah, with
Caitlin,
the
yeah, with
newspaper.
the newspaper, and that's her parents' wedding photos. Uh,
Jennifer.
Jennifer Gao. Jennifer Gao, she joined a little bit later, very hesitant, very shy, but then was able to tell her family story. It was very brave of her. Now, Han Fan, you had her, didn't you,
Oh
Matt?
yeah, yep. She was a freshman in AP US history
Mhm.
while we were doing this project. So the lesson I'm able to make off of all of these, she didn't even get to experience that, but she helped me write that lesson. So yeah, she was for
Mhm.
the freshmen who were awesome.
Yeah, freshman. Sophia Gao. I think this is a photo of her family becoming citizens, U.S. citizens here.
There were a lot of those in the images.
Hmm.
Henry.
Henry Nguyen family honoring their ancestors.
Gavino.
Gavino Nguyen. Oh, we have to make a correction on the last name, Nguyen. Um, so his mother was Amerasian, and so he told that story as well. That's meaning mother is Vietnamese, father is an American GI. Mhm.
Christina.
Christina Lay. Her story was very moving about, let's see if we can recall, Matt.
Yeah. Oh, her parents came in the 90s, which was interesting to learn about how that was a little bit different. But her quote at the end about how proud she was of her family and how proud she was to to be Vietnamese and to be an American. And she just wanted everyone to know for sure how much better West Michigan was because of Vietnamese immigrants. It was Christina is
Mhm.
amazing. She's gonna be in Congress someday.
Amberly Nguyen.
She
Um,
shared at the event. Beautiful.
this is her family photo, a reunion. So yes, her grandparents came here first with three of their children, and slowly over the years, her grandparents started to sponsor more of their children and more of their children, and now every single member of her family, aunts and uncles, are here in West Michigan. So that is the reunion photo right there.
Um, and then finally, just we got to celebrate this at both the Grand Rapids Public Museum and then also at the Ford Museum.
Ford
And
Museum.
so, and I want to just end with this one photo here. And I felt that this was a particularly great moment when some of the people got to take a picture with Steve Ford. And I don't know, Lay, just if you can close us out with just, how it felt to be with, the son of Gerald Ford who made the coming to Michigan possible.
Yes, we were so honored to have Steve Ford join us at this event on May 9th. We had a program where I've invited some of the local singers and dancers uh, to create this program, make it more meaningful. So we have singers that represented the northern part of the country of Vietnam and the central part and the southern part, because that is, if you know anything about Vietnam, we divide into three regions, very distinctive and different dialects. And so I wanted to have that representation there. And the ASU Student Union put together a dance where they wore traditional Vietnamese áo dài. The red áo dài is from the northern part of the country, but traditionally it would be more muted, earthy colors. But for performances, more bright colors here. And then the southern part, the white áo dài. And so the girls put together a dance with the hats and the áo dài. It was just beautiful. We had different aspects of the Vietnamese cultures on stage. And Steve Ford also invited Thuy, who was an adoptee, right? No, no, no.
Amerasian adoptee. Yeah,
Baby Lift.
baby.
Yes, she escaped Vietnam via that way, and so she was able to share her story with the audience. So moving, and she's very grateful to be here. And Thuy went back to Vietnam to visit her mother. All right.
So, well, thanks. This is a teaser. I hope to see everybody on January 17th. And thank you very